program will begin shortly. Please welcome Governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Senators, Governor, members of Congress, sovereign tribal leaders, mayors, guests, and the Mondale family. Welcome to Minnesota, Gopher Nation, North Star State, land of 10,000 lakes, and probably most famously known, home of Walter Mondale. Walter Mondale changed every person he came in contact with. He changed this state, he changed this nation, and he changed this world, all for the better. Fritz was a national figure, but at heart, and everyone in this room knows, he was always just a boy from southern Minnesota. He embodied a sense of joy. He lived his life every single day with that joy at the forefront. At 91, he was still fishing for walleye. Unlike me, he was catching them. Everyone who met Fritz Mondale considered him a friend. Few people I've ever met did you feel were more present when you were with them. There was no place he needed to be. There was no one more important than that moment. And every person I've ever talked to felt that. After you spent time with Walter Mondale, I left feeling hopeful, optimistic for the future, a little nervous that I was going to disappoint him, but always happy. You're going to hear a lot today of stories, a keen intellect, a political giant, an innovator, a change maker. He was all that, but he was also one of the funniest people I've ever met. He would leave you with a story or weave something in, and it was never humor at someone's expense. It was humor about just the funny things in life, of observing and taking it in and recognizing we're all in this together. Fritz carried those southern Minnesota values with him throughout his career. Also, it was such a privilege to get to hear him talk about his father and his family. His father, as we all know, small-town farmer and minister from Elmore in southern Minnesota, told him, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly. We all know Fritz Mondale did those things, but he also was really clear. These aren't partisan type of ideas or goals. These are values, and the grace to serve them should be at the center of our lives. They were certainly at the center of Fritz Mondale's life, and each and every one of us, I know I was, never wanted to disappoint him, and always tried to live up to what he expected. He embodied what we know are Minnesota values. His family instilled them in them, and he went out and used them to change the world. Thank you to the Mondale family for sharing this incredible man with each of us, with the state of Minnesota, with our country, and with the world. Thank you.
University of Minnesota President Joan Gable.
President Biden, Governor Walz, senators, sovereign tribal leaders, distinguished speakers and guests, and the Mondale family, welcome to the University of Minnesota, which is located on the traditional homelands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe people. Friends, I had the personal honor to spend some wonderful one-on-one time with Vice President Walter Mondale, our law school and College of Liberal Arts alumnus, while I was transitioning from my post at the University of South Carolina to assume the presidency here at the University of Minnesota. You all might not be surprised to hear that he checked me out first with a few of his trusted colleagues, like our mutual friend, the late South Carolinian Don Fowler. I must have cleared because he could not have been more welcoming or supportive as I came on board, including to invite me to participate in the first of the university's Mondale Dialogues, which was launched to not only highlight pressing issues of the times, like how much power is too much for an American president. I will say I did not pick that topic, Mr. President. But most importantly, to promote the principles and values that inspired his career, pillars of conscience, conviction, and service. That evening, Vice President Mondale expressed his great optimism about America's future, a sentiment that defined his life and his long-standing affinity for the University of Minnesota's mission, a mission very much aligned with his own, which is etched into the front of this very building. It says, "Founded in the faith that everyone is ennobled by understanding, dedicated to the advancement of learning and the search for truth, devoted to the instruction of youth and the welfare of the state." Friends, in today's society, leaders of Vice President Mondale's stripe are a rarity, effective and kind, an observation best summed up by another one of our alums, Hubert H. Humphrey, Jr., that Walter Mondale is not a polarizer, and by President Jimmy Carter, who called him a model for public service. On behalf of a grateful university, we recognize with appreciation the countless and inspiring ways Vice President Mondale gave back to his alma mater and made us all better, as a teacher and leader, as a namesake and benefactor to our law school and Humphrey School Fellowship Program, and as a friend and mentor to students and colleagues alike. The University of Minnesota is fortunate to have held such a special place in his universe and across his exemplary life of dedication and service to Minnesota and the world as Vice President, U.S. Senator, presidential candidate, U.S. Ambassador to Japan, and Minnesota's Attorney General. It is therefore left to us to step into his indelible footprints here at his alma mater, in the hearts of our university family and throughout the world. So let the path he forged guide us in his ever-optimistic way, and let it heal us so we can ensure in his honor that our best days still lie ahead. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lawrence Jacobs.
In 2004, the then dean of the Humphrey School, Brian Atwood, took me out to lunch. He was trying to recruit me to move from the political science department over to the Humphrey School, and his massive effort was around the newly established Mondale Endowed Chair. He was very proud of this, and he was assured that I would accept it immediately. But, like most faculty, I had some nitty-gritty questions. Teaching load, research support, and so forth. And Brian sighed with near resignation. He said, "You don't get it. The best part of this is you'll work with Walter Mondale." Brian Atwood was right. For 16 years, Walter Mondale and I worked together. on a number of projects. But Walter Mondale brought his greatest passion to teaching. We taught thousands of students here at the University of Minnesota, undergraduates, graduates, folks who were auditing, wanted to take the class. He was a breath of fresh air. He was rigorous, and he was demanding. I want to talk a little bit about some of those features. Preparation and seriousness are Mondale traits, particularly Professor Mondale. During one group presentation, Mr. Mondale pointed to a student who was leaning against the chalkboard, put up his hands to stop the group presentation, and said, "Stand up, convince us that you actually believe what you're saying." The student stood up, and all of us thought, "Oh my God, always stand up straight." I was not immune from the scrutiny. During one class, when I was carefully, I thought, relating the readings for the class to the topic at hand, Mr. Mondale raised his hand. And he asked a question that probably more of my colleagues should be asked now and again, though we'd prefer it not be asked by a former Vice President of the United States. Mr. Mondale asked, "What are you talking about?" The substantive core of this course was the United States Constitution's principles of public accountability. This was a cornerstone of Mr. Mondale's career in politics and calling as a teacher. He wanted us to inspect the ageless tendency of presidents to abuse power or to be tempted to abuse power, and the imperative of the checks and balances to rein them in. And we then went and interrogated most administrations, skipping a few in the 19th century, Democrat and Republican, including his own, beginning with George Washington. This was a serious person who read and thought and challenged all of us to do that. Mr. Mondale modeled for students values that we have here at the University of Minnesota: the imperative of research, the imperative of books and ideas, and how serious they were. But he added something else. He wanted the students to appreciate the hard edges of politics and policy and not leave this world and go into the caverns of ideas alone. He searched for that incredible synthesis. He also implored students to exercise what he described as America's fundamental, profound, and sacred principles of democracies. And sometimes there would be a student or two who would raise their hand and say, "Nothing gets done in America anymore." And Walter Mondale would pause, he'd tilt his head, and then he would give witness to the power of American democracy, to fight back against the South's apartheid system of racial segregation and violence during and up through the 1950s, to lift millions of seniors from the anguish of hunger and illness, and to empower school-age girls to enjoy the thrill of athletic competition in our gyms by helping to pass Title IX. Professor Mondale is a living legacy to all the students who took those classes and to me.
Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Dr. Tim Hart Anderson.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we gather in this Easter season to give you thanks and praise for the life and witness of Walter F. Mondale. In remembering him and his legacy of public service, help us recall the source of the values that guided him. You summon us to seek justice, to uphold the full humanity of all, to ensure equal access, and to do so with kindness and humility. Your servant Fritz embraced those gospel ideals. As we face the mystery of death, help us, we pray, to see the light of eternity, the light that now shines on Fritz, Joan, and Eleanor. With the power of a love that knows no bounds, hold them close and comfort and encourage all who continue to struggle for the world you desire for the human community. In your name we pray. Amen. Fritz Mondale was born into a home steeped in biblical wisdom. Theodore, his Methodist pastor father, would have been trained for the ministry in the time when the social gospel was ascendant. The values of doing good and making the world a better place for all were taught in the Mondale household and in Sunday school by Fritz's mother, Clarabelle, who also played the piano at church. I believe I attended more church services, Fritz once said, sang in more weddings and funerals, attended more Sunday schools than any public official in the history of southern Minnesota. His family drew from the well of Methodist teaching that linked passion, discipline, intellect, and concern for the least of these. It was a potent combination of a heart aflame with rigorous commitment to serve the most vulnerable in society. That theological context formed young Fritz, and it would define his character all his life. My faith and my family have been my greatest blessings in my life, he said in a speech not long ago. I was taught that ours was a faith of decency and social justice, based on the great commandment to love your God and to love your neighbor as yourself. Like many of us, Fritz did not wear his religion on his sleeve. In fact, he was suspicious of anyone who did. His was a Beatitudes-based faith, drawing on the simple teaching of Jesus. Blessed are those who are meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who are poor, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Blessed are those who make peace, for they will be called children of God. Fritz found the holy in what Wendell Berry calls the peace of wild things, whether at their cabin on the St. Croix Valley or fishing up north. His work in protecting rivers was driven by homegrown Minnesota commitment to stewardship of the earth. Wilderness is a spiritual necessity, Sigurd Olson said in words that Fritz lived, a means of regaining serenity and equilibrium. An usher at church this morning came up to me and said how grateful he and his fishing buddies are for what Fritz did to protect the rivers of this land. And he said he never got a chance to thank him in person on his behalf and on that of many others. Thank you, Fritz. Every time Fritz referred to his upbringing, which he did regularly, it was his way of remembering what had shaped his life and formed the person he became. The Mondales were faithful members of the church I serve, Westminster Presbyterian in downtown Minneapolis. Joan's father was a Presbyterian chaplain at McAllister College, which Fritz attended before the U. He met Joan on a blind date at McAllister, and it was the start of their beautiful life together. The nation saw and admired Fritz's public service. I did too. And as his pastor, I also saw the husband and father who deeply loved his family. The loss of Eleanor tore open his heart, and Joan's death took part of his life as well. Millions of Americans suffer from Alzheimer's, 2/3 of whom are women. As Joan declined, Fritz tenderly cared for her right to the end, rarely leaving her side. Toward the end of his life, he said he looked forward to being with them both again. Fritz trusted in the power of God's love in this life and the next. He was not concerned about the state of his soul. Shortly after his 90th birthday party held here at the university, I had lunch with him, and as I often do with older parishioners, I asked if he ever thought about the end of his life. He glanced around the noisy place, leaned forward and said, "In the strict confidentiality of this room, I will tell you that I will be the first person to live forever." "I've made the arrangements," he said. I thanked him for letting me in on the secret. "Actually," he said, "I understand it happens to everyone at some point. Do you think Carter will come?" President Carter has sent words we will hear later. But he was able to be here for Joan's memorial service at Westminster in our sanctuary, and he gave a moving tribute to her and to the life partnership she had with Fritz, and we also heard from Vice President Biden at that time. Walter Mondale may not have been concerned about the state of his soul, but he was concerned about the state of his nation, especially in recent years. The rise of the religious right as a powerful force in American politics was a source of considerable consternation to him. "Tell me what's going on with these fundamentalist preachers," he would say to me, as if I know. Fritz understood neither the Christianity they espoused nor the politics they practiced. Both were utterly foreign to his way of living out a quiet faith through public policy aimed squarely at justice for those on the receiving end of the cruelties of history. His Christianity was kind and humble, and it confounded him when fellow believers were neither. Once when we were at a meal in a restaurant, word got out in the kitchen that the vice president was eating there, and the kitchen door swung open, and one by one, the dishwashers and the bussers, all of them immigrants, came out to shake his hand and to thank him for his service to the nation. Fritz treated each one with respect and dignity. On his office desk, Fritz had taped some lines from Psalm 15. The Hebrew poet provided the scriptural framing of the politics he practiced. And as I read these words to you from Fritz's desk to this place here, contrast them with much of what passes for political leadership today, present company accepted. Lord, who can be trusted with power and who may act in your place? Those with a passion for justice, who speak the truth from their hearts, who have let go of selfish interests and grown beyond their own lives, who see the wretched as their family and the poor as their flesh and blood. They alone are impartial and worthy of the people's trust. Their compassion lights up the whole earth, and their kindness endures forever. Theodore and Clarabelle's son, born 94 years ago, grew up and entered political life and served his beloved Minnesota and our nation for decades, never wandering far from his roots. Thanks be to God for the life of Walter F. Mondale. Thanks be to God for love that cannot be taken from us. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please draw your attention to the center screen for video remarks from Josie Johnson.
When I think about my friend, Fritz Mondale, and what created an environment that welcomed all kinds of people and encouraged all kinds of conversation, and was a person that you felt listened, was honest, and committed to the issues that we were outlining as those of democracy and equal opportunity. Fritz Mondale listened to people. He not only listened to all of us, he understood and could add to the conversation that encouraged all of us in his environment to speak clearly and directly the issues of justice. I never will forget how excited I was at the thought of Fritz Mondale running for president. I never will forget how honored I felt this humble man who always welcomed other points of view and encouraged everyone in his sphere to be open, to be inclusive, to be just, and to the thought of him running for president of the United States of America was just such a wonderful, unbelievable thought that many of us had, because he was such a humble person. And for him to understand that who he was and what he represented was what we needed in our society, made us all want to be engaged in everything we could be engaged in and get that message out to the public and to the community. That he modeled humility, he modeled honesty, he modeled respect for others, he modeled inclusiveness that really engaged the people around him in decision-making, in thoughtful process of what we as a community should be directing our attention to, and what we need to be teaching our children and the next generation of people in honesty and justice and the art of hearing and listening. So I will always feel that I was blessed to be engaged with Fritz Mondale from the early 1960s until his untimely death. My joy, my sense of gratitude, and my deep sense of loss of a great friend.
Ladies and gentlemen, United States Senator Tina Smith.
Ted and William and the Mondale family, all of the Mondale family, President Biden, Governor Walz and Governor Dayton, Senator Klobuchar, President Gable, and all of Mr. Mondale's many friends at the University of Minnesota, members of Congress and other national and Minnesota leaders, tribal leaders, presidential historian John Meacham, and all of Fritz's friends and colleagues who are gathered here today. I first met Fritz Mondale in a garage in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. It was around 1989. Our sons, Sam and Mason, were 2 and about 6 months old, and I had zero experience in politics. But Archie and I were looking for a way to connect more deeply to our community, so I decided to volunteer for a local state Senate candidate full of energy and ideas, a young family just like us, and his name happened to be Ted Mondale. So one sunny September day, I packed up the kids in a stroller and headed for a house a few blocks away for an afternoon door knock. And there, in the back of the garage, over by the sign-in table, was the former Vice President of the United States, the first major party presidential nominee to put a woman on the ticket, a bona fide political celebrity, just standing there in khakis. "How you doing?" he said. "Thanks for showing up." And I kept showing up. How could I not? Joan Mondale was the volunteer coordinator, and I have yet to meet a person who could say no to Joan Mondale. I always remember that first meeting, even as politics and public service became a bigger part of my life, and as I got to know Mr. Mondale better. After the 2002 Senate race, which was so painful in so many ways, Mr. Mondale and I started going to lunch every once in a while. We would often talk politics, but it didn't feel like a work meeting. It just felt like two friends chatting and sharing onion rings at Murray's. I think that a lot of us who knew Mr. Mondale, we started out thinking of him as a hero, and we wound up daring to think of him as a friend. Ask them about his life, and people will undoubtedly talk about his incredible record of service and accomplishment. But inevitably, you'll see them lean in and look around, and they'll say, but here's the thing. I really felt like I mattered to him. And that was the thing about Walter Mondale. You did matter to him. Andy Myers was one of Mr. Mondale's staffers when he was ambassador to Japan, and he tells this story. Mondale loved walking the streets, and one day he came across a little shop that sold these pastries called taiyaki. And it was run by a very enthusiastic guy who would stand outside the shop screaming, "Get your taiyaki! Get your taiyaki!" Well, Andy writes, Mondale fell in love with this guy at first sight. His energy, the vitality, the focus. Mondale had finally found his true essence of Japan. And when it came time to leave Japan, and there was an official reception at the stately ambassador's residence, along with Prime Minister Hashimoto and the full diplomatic corps, Mondale insisted the guy from the taiyaki shop was invited too. And as Andy tells it, he was the first one in the door and the last one to leave, and the one that I think Mondale was happiest to see. You know, this week I have been reading a lot of tributes to Mr. Mondale's life and his legacy. President Carter wrote, "His ideas and energy changed the office he held forever, and his intelligence, his experience and humor and determination made me better at mine." President Clinton observed that throughout his long life, Fritz never stopped believing in the power of public service to make a difference in people's lives. And President Obama described Mondale's lifetime of service as, and I quote, "an incredible gift to his nation," adding, "in championing causes like fair housing and women's rights, he helped put the promise of America within the reach of more people." As I've been reading all of these notes, I've been reading some sent by people who worked for Walter Mondale when he ran for president and never really left his orbit. One is from a former staffer, Gina Glanz, who told the story of how when her mom got sick and the Mayo Clinic seemed like really the only option for treatment, she worked up the nerve to ask Mr. Mondale for help. Well, Vice President Mondale called a retired nurse friend, and within weeks, Gina's mother was at the Mayo with the person behind the check-in desk at Mayo saying, "And how do you know our Fritz?" So many Americans were called to action by that 1984 campaign, a campaign rooted in truth and decency and hope. And 4 decades later, many of you, are still involved in politics, still working to uphold the values that defined Walter Mondale's remarkable life. And even though many of us have yet to find a boss who really we had such a personal connection to. As for me, nearly 30 years after I first met Walter Mondale in that garage, I found myself going to Washington to be sworn into the United States Senate. It is Senate tradition that senators are escorted down the center aisle of the Senate chamber to take our oath of office, accompanied by a mentor or respected figure of our choice. And when I thought about who I wanted to escort me, I, of course, immediately thought of Vice President Mondale. I asked him, and at first he turned me down. "You want someone new," he insisted. And then a day or two later, I got one of those calls from the inimitable Linda Pedersen that many of us have gotten over the years. Well, she said, he's coming. So the big day arrives, and I've got Amy Klobuchar and Walter Mondale escorting me into the Senate. And Doug Jones is also being sworn in that day, and he's got Joe Biden escorting him into the Senate. And you know, that swearing in is a very quick thing. It only takes half a minute or so. And to tell you the truth, Doug and I are a little overstimulated. We're a little nervous. We have lists of things we're supposed to be doing, people to see, places to go, and we need to get going. But for the life of us, we cannot get President Biden and Vice President Mondale off of the Senate floor. President Biden, I have a sense that this is something that your advanced team can relate to. The two of you were there, chatting and telling stories and having a grand time. You looked both like you had just come home. A few days later, someone asked Vice President Mondale if it had been an emotional experience for him being back on the Senate floor. Well, Mondale looks at his questioner and shrugs. Norwegian emotional, he says. Well, those of us who knew Vice President Mondale knew exactly what that means. But for those of you who don't, here's one last quick story. The last time the Vice President and I had lunch together, it was about 10 days before we lost him. He was pretty quiet, but he was very engaged and interested in what was going on, curious till the end. And I think that we both knew that we probably wouldn't see each other again. And when it came time for me to leave, I went over to his side of the table. And I leaned over and I put my hand on his shoulder and I kissed him on the cheek and I said, "I love you." Well, Walter Mondale, he looks up at me and he says, "I've always been high on you." That is Norwegian emotional. That was our Fritz. And as I imagine him reunited with his beloved Joan and Eleanor, and as I look at all of you in this auditorium full of people devoted to carrying on his life's work, and as I envision a generation of Americans inspired by his commitment to fight good fights and to tell hard truths, well, let's just say that I'm feeling some emotions that a real Norwegian would not want to talk about. Americans will never forget how much Walter Mondale gave to our country. Minnesotans will never forget the example he set for our state. And those of us in this room will never forget our friend.
Ladies and gentlemen, John Meacham.
Mr. President, Madam President, Senator Smith, Governor, Senator Klobuchar, Reverend Professor Ted William, and the broader Mondale official family. The story begins the year before he was even old enough to vote. It was a late July afternoon in 1948, and Fritz Mondale, then all of 20, had been put in charge of the 2nd Congressional District for Hubert Humphrey's U.S. Senate campaign. No one knew what second prize was. The annual Martin County Farm Bureau Federation picnic at Fox Lake Park needed a speaker, and Mr. Mondale arranged for Humphrey to headline the event. The political climate was charged and complicated in that American summer. There was anxiety at home, communist aggression abroad, as a Democratic president sought to govern a fractious party and a divided country. As Mark Twain once said, history may not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. Seen as too liberal by the right and too conservative by the left, Harry Truman would say he didn't give Republicans hell. He just told them the truth, and they thought it was hell. In his own party, President Truman faced opposition over his desegregation of the military and his push for civil rights. Only weeks before the Martin County picnic, Mayor Humphrey's civil rights speech at the Democratic Convention in Philadelphia had helped send segregationist Dixiecrats out of the hall and back into the old Confederacy. But far from the Olympian drama of Philadelphia, in Martin County, after the 4-H club band had played, Humphrey took the stage. He was passionate and funny. He said, "Kick the rascals out and vote the new rascals in." Afterward, Humphrey thanked his young ally, telling Mr. Mondale, "Your work is needed. We have so much to do." Mr. Mondale was over the moon. After that day, he recalled, "I think I never stopped. I think I never stopped." And we live in a better, nobler, more perfect union because Walter Frederick Mondale never stopped. Now, for the politicians in the room, and there might be one or two of you who snuck through customs, an election result, in 1948, Humphrey carried Mondale's territory, the very Republican 2nd District, by 8,500 votes. It was Mr. Mondale's first victory, and it was a sweet one, second only perhaps to his 7 dates and 6 months courtship of Joan Adams. The son of a Methodist minister and farmer, as a child, Walter Mondale absorbed a gospel that he never stopped seeking to put into practice, that we are summoned to love our neighbors as ourselves, to lift up the most vulnerable among us, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to strengthen the weak. There's nothing more important, nothing more American than that. To enlist in the perennial battle to make real the founding ideal of this nation, that we are in fact created equal. We can and we will and we do disagree about the means of governance. But at our best, Americans have agreed on the end of our common project, to give everyone, in Lincoln's phrase, an open field and a fair chance. Walter Mondale devoted his life to that cause. He never stopped seeking a fuller, freer, fairer America. And his years in the arena are testament to a truth of human experience, that the polls and the passions of the moment are just that, of the moment. Headlines come and go, history endures. The tumult of politics rage. True service stands long after the furies of the moment have passed. Walter Mondale understood something fundamental, that we are at our best not when we build walls, but when we build bridges. Not when we point fingers, but when we lend a hand. Not when we fear, but when we hope. And from age to age, history honors those who put we the people above the will to power, the rule of law above the reign of party, and difficult truths above self-serving fiction. Now, as we heard from Senator Smith, the Mondales were a stoic people. His father, Theodore, fought a stutter, struggled to farm, went to seminary, and raised a son, Fritz, who knew hardship but lived in hope. It was a hope that drove him all his life. He was born, think about it, he was born a year before the stock market crash. His childhood was shaped by the Great Depression. He believed in hard work. He liked to say he was the only P-lice inspector to ever become Vice President of the United States. I didn't check it, but I think he's on safe ground. Some might have preferred it. He served in the U.S. Army, went to law school on the GI Bill, and always gave back to the country that had made his life possible. Now, he was often caricatured, as you all know, as a big government liberal. But he's better understood as a Cold War liberal, a man devoted at home and abroad to freedom and to fairness. Freedom and fairness. Bear those words in mind, for they are the words that shaped Walter Mondale's consequential life. And Lord knows they are the words that must guide us still. In the struggle between democracy and dictatorship in the 20th century, Fritz Mondale cast his lot with neither the utopians of the left nor the reactionaries of the right. He stood instead for the centrality of the individual, for the sanctity of liberty, and for the pursuit of possibility against the totalitarian impulse. As Attorney General of Minnesota, he was instrumental in the Gideon case that gave indigent defendants the right to counsel. He brokered the deal that would end segregation forever in the Democratic Party, long the bastion of Jim Crow. And then he came to the Senate. In the mid-1960s, in the seat that Hubert Humphrey had won the year of that Farm Bureau picnic, Senator Mondale sensed a vital intersection of forces. To him, as he put it, it was as if we took the intellectual heritage of Franklin Roosevelt, the moral inspiration of John Kennedy, and a decade of pent-up demand for social change and converted them into social reality. As a senator, he was a crucial voice for the Voting Rights Act of 1965. He led the battle for fair housing in 1968, mastering the Senate in that essential hour. And he never stopped. His causes included Title IX to open opportunities for women, Head Start in elementary and secondary education, filibuster reform, nutrition and anti-poverty programs, workers' rights, environmental protections, consumer protections, early attention to the crisis of climate change, the domestic side of the Church Committee, which revealed the FBI's wiretapping and harassment of Martin Luther King Jr., the transformation of the vice presidency in the Carter years, a challenge to apartheid that ignited the chain of events that led to the release of Nelson Mandela, and the nomination of a woman, Geraldine Ferraro, to run with him on a national ticket. Walter Mondale was a giant of the Senate, a formidable vice president, and a truth-telling presidential nominee of his party, who never stopped standing by principle. Now, to be sure, it was not always the smoothest of rides. Fritz Mondale knew the vicissitudes of politics as well as any American ever has. When he explored a run for president in 1976, he recalled that after a year I was running 6 points behind I don't know, and I wanted to challenge him to a debate. Mr. Mondale would tell the story of Sam Donaldson's asking Ronald Reagan in 1984, "What do you want for Christmas?" And Reagan said, "Minnesota." When Mr. Mondale went to ask George McGovern when did it stop hurting to lose the presidency, Senator McGovern said, "I don't know. I'll tell you when it happens." Walter Mondale loved his family. He loved fishing, Shakespeare, Dairy Queen, the United States Senate, Hubert Humphrey, cigars, and the state of Minnesota. And most of all, he loved America, its complexities and its hopes, its promise and its possibilities. He thought of himself as a public servant, as a citizen with an obligation to the common good. To him, government was not the enemy or the problem, but rather a manifestation of love of neighbor and of country. On the night of his defeat in 1984, he spoke not only to the moment, as painful as it was, but to history, saying, "Let us continue to seek an America that is just and fair. That has been my fight. I'm confident that history will judge us honorably." And so it has. One of Mr. Mondale's favorite verses of Scripture tells us much. I have fought the good fight, St. Paul said. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. The first part of that chapter of 2 Timothy is quoted less often, but is worth remembering. Preach the word, the apostle wrote. Be prepared in season and out of season. In season and out of season. Justice knows no season. Truth knows no season. Freedom knows no season. Fairness knows no season. Walter Mondale knew that, he lived by that, and today we salute him for that. There are children in America today who will not go hungry because of Fritz Mondale. There are black people in America today who can vote and work and live more freely and fairly because of Fritz Mondale. There are women in America today who see no limit to their dreams because of Fritz Mondale. There are safer cars in America. There are rivers of clean water in America. There are enclaves of untouched wildlife in America today because of Fritz Mondale. He never stopped believing in this country. He never stopped fighting for its people. And thankfully, he never stopped defending democracy. He never stopped, and nor, in his memory, must we.
Ladies and gentlemen, United States Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Good afternoon. Thank you for those beautiful words, John. Mr. President, distinguished guests, it is so wonderful to see everyone again. And what better person to bring us together than our Walter Mondale. Ted, William, thank you for putting together this beautiful event. And it is an honor for John and I to be here with you and your family to celebrate the life of your dad, our friend, our leader, our mentor, our Fritz. A few years back, I visited the Carter Museum in Atlanta. Of course, I wanted to learn about President Carter's early days in planes. But like the Mondale geek that I am, I just kept asking the guides to show me everything Mondale. The buttons, Congressman Phillips is sporting one today, the videos of the speeches, Governor Dayton, the grits and Fritz signs, some of you remember those. And yes, I even asked if they had Joan's dress from the inauguration. But at the very end of the visit, I saw some words inscribed large on the wall. They were Walter Mondale's words. You see, right after they lost in 1980, he was able to look back at their 4 years in the White House with clear-eyed reflection. He said this: "We told the truth, we obeyed the law, we kept the peace." I wrote those words down on a piece of paper and tucked them in my purse, and I kept them there as a touchstone to get through the last years. We told the truth, we obeyed the law, we kept the peace. That's our Mondale. That's the standard and more that he held himself to each and every day of his life. It was what guided him, Keith Ellison, as a young state attorney general, when he led attorneys general across the country to embrace the right to counsel in a landmark Supreme Court case. Tell the truth, obey the law, keep the peace. It's what mattered to him as a U.S. Senator when he fought for civil rights and fair housing. It's what motivated him as our country's Vice President when he insisted on being a true partner to President Carter, deserving of a place in the room where it happens. Setting a high standard? How about when he picked Geraldine Ferraro as his running mate? I still remember her standing there next to him in her red dress and her string of white pearls, and it was at that moment when I knew anything and everything was possible. And he continued setting those high standards as ambassador to Japan, a nation in which he was known affectionately, of course, as Amano, or in Midwestern vernacular, the big cheese. Walter Mondale told the truth. He obeyed the law, he kept the peace. And despite his seemingly stoic Norwegian cautious manner, okay, correction, Tina, Ted, William, his actual Norwegian stoic manner, he took risks. He led the way. He set a high bar. And time after time, he kept passing it and raising it, passing it and raising it. It was during Mondale's time as vice president that we first met. My first assignment as a college intern was to conduct the furniture inventory. I thought I was going to write all these policy papers. This was it. My job was to crawl under every staff member's table and chair and lamp and diligently check the serial numbers. As I like to tell students, I learned two things from that summer. The first, the vice president was scrupulously honest. Nothing was missing. And second, take every job seriously, because that was my first job in Washington, and thanks to Walter Mondale, this was my second. I found out way back then that for Vice President Mondale, public service was not about personal glory. It was about the people. It was about democracy. It was about our country. That's why Fritz made it his mission to prepare the next generation of leaders in Minnesota at this great university. He became a devoted mentor to so many, including me. Vice President Mondale was the first to encourage me to run for the U.S. Senate. He was the first to teach the pundits in Washington how to say my last name. And the first time I spoke, Mr. President, at the National Democratic Convention, it was Walter Mondale who warned me of the danger of relying on a teleprompter. Back in 2004 as county attorney, Hennepin County attorney, I was invited to speak at the Democratic Convention in Boston. Okay, let me correct that too. They didn't really invite me. He got me invited. And of course, he was there. The morning of my speech, Fritz came up to me and said, "Now you've memorized your speech, right?" I told him there was a teleprompter and it was only 3 minutes and I would be just fine. He said, "No, that isn't fine. Remember the time in 1980 at the convention when Carter said Hubert Horatio Hornblower? That was a teleprompter screw up, so don't trust it. Memorize the speech." Now, this advice struck me as a little bit out of date, but I told him I would memorize my speech, and I did. Later that night, I was at the convention on the big stage, ready to go for my big 3-minute moment. Senator Leahy was up at the podium. In the middle of his speech, he suddenly stopped and looked around the room. The teleprompter had gone dark. From where I stood waiting on the corner of the stage, I can see Walter Mondale in the front row. I made eye contact with him, and I have never seen a more pointed "I told you so" nod in my life. I nodded back. When I got up there, whether the teleprompter was working again or not didn't matter anymore. Thanks to Walter Mondale, I never gave it a glance. I looked only at the crowd. I added some stuff. I had some fun. It was great. And when it was done, people were clapping and cheering, and some of them even stood up. Do you know why? Because Walter Mondale was there in the first row. And when he stood, they stood. He was my mentor from the very beginning of this journey. He taught me a lot, but maybe the most amazing gift he gave me was the gift of resilience. Because you see, it wasn't just the decency he displayed on the national political stage that made him stand out. It was the dignity he brought home in the wake of defeat. It was not easy for Walter Mondale to run against Ronald Reagan, knowing that most people were predicting that Reagan would win. It was not easy for Walter Mondale to come out of retirement and run for the Senate after we lost Paul Wellstone. It was not easy for Walter Mondale to continue his work while caring for his beloved wife Joan and their daughter Eleanor through heartbreaking illnesses. None of it was easy. But when saddled with enormous setbacks, Fritz didn't stand down, he stood up. Fritz didn't crawl under his desk or hide from public view. He simply found a different way to serve. He went from being driven around with tons of Secret Service and meeting with world leaders and negotiating international treaties to going into London, grocery shopping on his own, and happily ending his visit with a long, engaged talk about Mideast peace with the high school kid at the checkout counter. That happened. You see, being humble meant that it was much easier to be resilient. Being grounded meant that no matter how high he had risen, there was always a place to come home. That place was here. That place was us. This week in Washington, we celebrated the life of one of Fritz's friends, someone who had worked for him on his presidential campaign, the incredible Madeleine Albright. The two of them shared not only an unshakable belief in democracy and human rights, but also a dry wit and a rare ability to self-reflect on their lives, flaws and all. As Secretary Albright once wrote, lives are necessarily untidy and uneven, and it is important to have a guiding star. That, for us, was Walter Mondale, the son of a minister who went from a small town in southern Minnesota to the world stage. And on his way up, he never lost his way. He was and is our guiding star. He was and is our North Star. Now, it is my distinct honor to introduce you to a friend of Fritz's. Just as Walter Mondale believed in the dignity of all people, the promise of America to take care of our people, so does our honored guest. President Joseph R. Biden has taken the reins of our country at an unparalleled time. He is leading at a moment when we must emerge from this pandemic not as a country in 300+ million silos, but as one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. President Biden has led our nation and the democracies of the world to stand up to the inhuman barbarism of Vladimir Putin and stand with the bright blue and yellow and the courage and conviction of the people of Ukraine. As Walter Mondale once wrote, our founders believed that America needs leaders who transcend the politics of the moment and pursue the nation's long-term aspirations. Leaders who will take care of the Constitution, understanding that they are only custodians of an ideal. That describes, of course, Walter Mondale, but that also describes his good friend, Joe Biden. President Biden served with Walter Mondale in the Senate when then-candidate Obama asked Joe Biden to be his vice president in this very state. The first call Joe Biden made was to Fritz. He relied on him. And on Fritz's last day on Earth, our president was there on the phone with him. Mr. President, Vice President Mondale loved you. He believed in you. He trusted you with our country's future. And he is looking down from the heavens today, smiling, so proud you are here in his beloved state of Minnesota. Friends, it is now my honor to introduce to you the President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. What Fritz is really saying, looking down, is, Joe, hide your Irish Catholic enthusiasm a little bit and be more Norwegian. The generous introduction. You know, I got a chance to talk with the family a little bit earlier, and trying to console them, and I got emotional. But as my grandfather Finnegan would say, that's the Irish of it. You know, I served with Fritz a long time. He became good and close friend. I was a kid when I got elected. I wasn't even old enough to be sworn in. I was only 29 years old. And because everything's based on seniority in the Senate, I got to hang out with folks like Fritz and Hubert long before you'd ordinarily at my age. Because by the time I was there a second term, I was chairman of some major committees. And so I'm going to talk more today about Fritz and what he pretend didn't exist, but Fritz's sense of empathy. Fritz had a special way about him that I don't think he would talk about. I could be wrong, but I never heard him talk about it. No, there was a question that Fritz famously asked staffers who came to work for him. He'd say, on the breakfast plate, what's the difference between the eggs and the bacon? Senator Smith and Klobuchar know the answer. By supplying the eggs, the chicken made a contribution. The hog was fully committed. And it always surprised Fritz I knew a little about agriculture. Delaware, my state, has in the Delmarva Peninsula, has a $5 billion industry. Chickens, a lot of chickens, a hell of a lot more chickens than people. And it's the biggest industry. But Fritz was always committed. not merely to the work of his lifetime, which all of you are familiar with. Most people know most of all. Everybody was blessed to know him in this state. You know, Reverend Hart Anderson, members of Congress, our military, distinguished guests, most of all, the Mondale family, Ted and William and Rebecca and Chan, all the grandchildren, Louis, Amanda, Barrett, Charlotte, Cassandra, Danielle, and all the dear friends of the family that are here as well. Because they always talked about you all as family. I'm moved to be with you here today as an honor one of the great giants in American history, and that's not hyperbole. Fritz was a giant in American political history. You know, a great American who, but he also had a lot of great Americans write about him and write things that related to him without them even knowing it. Great American novelist Edith Wharton wrote, "There are two ways of spreading light, to be a candle or the mirror that reflects it." Fritz was both the candle and the mirror, in my view. Candle spreading light and the mirror reflecting it. And today, I speak of a friend of 5 decades about that light, the light of friendship and what it meant to me personally, to my family. Fritz and I first met in one of the darkest moments of my life. I had not intended to run for the United States Senate. I was involved. My state, to its great shame, was segregated by law. We have the 8th largest black population in America as a percent of population in Delaware. I got involved in politics indirectly by getting involved in the civil rights movement as a kid, being the only white employee in the east side of Wilmington, an area called the Bucket, for years. And I was asked by a group of senior Democrats I was a young lawyer when I came back from law school, and we were the only city in America occupied by the National Guard for 10 months, with every corner being occupied by a National Guard member with a drawn bayonet because of Dr. King's assassination and the riots that took place in my home state. And I had a job with one of the oldest law firms in the state, a white shoe, as he used to call them, law firm. And after being home for 6 months, I couldn't do it anymore, and I left and sought a job as a public defender to represent the people I used to work with as a kid in high school and college. And so I came to the United States Senate with a passion to do something about civil rights. And when I was elected, I ran initially for the group. I joined a group of senior members of the United States, of the Delaware Democratic establishment, to reform the Democratic Party, because we were more a Southern Democratic Party than a Northeastern Democratic Party. Used to be able to join the Southern Governors Conference or the Mid-Atlantic Conference, and Democratic governors joined the Southern Governors Conference. But I couldn't bring myself to be a Republican, even though we're more progressive, because of Richard Nixon when I registered. But I was asked to head up a committee of younger people to try to get someone to run for the United States Senate against a guy who was a decent guy, actually, a little too conservative, but decent guy. And one thing led to another, and I ended up being asked to run for the Senate. I had no intention of running for the Senate. But 2 years earlier, I had been elected to the county council. And Delaware is like a miniature Illinois. One county has 60% of the state's population. So as a council person, I represented a district 7 times as large as the state representative and 3 times as large as the state senator. And I ran and won. I ran only to be a good soldier to try to get out Democrats voting. And I wasn't supposed to win. The only reason I ran, I was certain I wasn't going to win because I didn't want to be a county councilman. I was just setting up a law firm as a young senator, as a young man, I should say. And so what happened was I won in a district that was like 55, 56% Republican. No Democrat ever won. Republicans saw something in me I didn't see. They saw someone who may want to go on and run for office beyond that. So they reapportioned me from a 4-year term to a 2-year term into a 65% district. I was put in a position of up or out. And a group of senior members, a former governor, a former United States senator, a former congressman, and the retired Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, whose family had more senators than any family in American history. And they came to me and off your convention. I'll never forget how classic it was. It was a break in the convention in Dover, Delaware. I was at a little motel nearby to go back and change with the younger people I was with, and I had my own room. And, you know, the typical kind of, you drive up to the front door, 2 headboards nailed on the wall, a desk nailed to the other wall, and an 8x10 bathroom. So I was in shaving. I had my towel around me. I just got out of the shower and I was shaving. I just banging at the door. And I thought it was one of those, a guy named Bob Cunningham was with me. I said, all right, all right, all right. I went to the door and opened the door. There was a former 2-term governor named Edward Carville, former congressman named Harrison, and the state chairman, and the former chief justice. And I'm standing with a towel, shaving on my, and the rest of me stark naked. And I said, we want to talk to you, Joe. So I said, well, come on, gentlemen. I ran into the bathroom, take off the shaving cream, hoping I could find something to put on. I had nothing to put on. So I came back out and I leaned against that desk with the towel around me. I said, yes, gentlemen. And they said, Joe, we just had dinner. We think you should run for the Senate. And I said, and the Chief Justice, former Chief Justice Tunnell said that. I said, sir, I said, I'm not old enough. He said, Joe, you obviously didn't do very well on constitutional law. Thinking, holy God, what do I do now? And he said, you only have to be 30 to be sworn in. Then you can elect you whenever you want. You'll be 30 17 days later. Well, I ran, and to the shock and surprise of everybody, I won by a staggering 3,100 votes. But here's the point. I showed up on December 18th to hire staff. Hadn't been sworn in yet. And what happened was that I had gotten a phone call that day from my fire department in Delaware. And they put a poor young woman on the phone who said, you got to come home, there's been an accident. And she went on to tell me, the poor kid had to tell me, there was an accident. I said, what happened? He said, your wife and daughter are dead, and your 2 boys may not make it. And, you know, the last thing I wanted to do was go to the United States Senate after that. We had elected a governor, a Democrat. He could appoint a Democrat. And I had my brother talking to him about who we'd appoint. But there was Fritz and Joan. They embraced me, contacted me. It's not just being nice, but bringing me in. They came to the hospital to see my boys. They helped me find my purpose in a sea of darkness and pain. I was with Fritz along with Mike Mansfield and Teddy Kennedy and a few others who all came to see me and said, just come 6 months. You can go home after that. We need you. We had 58 Democrats. They didn't need me for a damn thing. No, serious. But I was such a rookie, I thought maybe they need me to organize. And he said, then you can leave. And I used to show up every Tuesday at 3 o'clock in the Senate chamber. to get an assignment from Senator Mansfield. Many times Fritz would walk me over. And I thought all freshmen got assignments. I didn't know. Nobody gets an assignment in the Senate. It wasn't until about 3 months in that I realized that was the case. But they kept me engaged. They helped me get up when it was easy to give up. My life changed again 5 years later. No man deserves one great love in his life, let alone two. But I met and married Jill Biden. Had to ask her 5 times. True. But being a spouse of a senator who was relatively well known because of the celebrity of how I got there and the accident, and inheriting 2 beautiful young boys wasn't easy. Once again, Fritz and Joan were there. Spreading the light. Joan was one of the first people to reach out to Jill. And it meant the world to us. It meant the world. You just heard from my friend John Meacham. Fritz was a master legislator who shone a light on those who needed it most. The desire to lift up others stemmed from his youth, from his service as a corporal in the U.S. Army in those early days organized for Hubert Humphrey in parts of Minnesota the Democrats didn't win. Fritz learned early the power of bringing people together. And I know that for Fritz, no moment was brighter than when he joined forces, because I was with him. I was just a bit player with an African-American senator from Massachusetts, Senator Everett Brooke, and they passed the Fair Housing Act. I was on the same side of the chamber in the back where Fritz was. I remember the look on his face, literally remember the look on his face. Opened up neighborhoods, diminished by segregation for so long. When the act passed, Fritz spoke on the Senate floor, and he said that, quote, "The words justice and fairness will mean more to millions of our fellow Americans than they do, will never have meant more to our fellow Americans than they do today." That was Fritz, spreading light, the light of our country, to families who had never truly known its warmth. At every stage of our lives, at every inflection point, Fritz and Joan, I apologize, we say in the Senate for the point of personal privilege here, but they were there for Jill and me and my family. Not on a political level, but on a personal level. It was true that my first days in the Senate, when I needed help very badly, and it was true in my last days in the Senate as well. In 2008, and Fritz and I had become close friends, and I had sought his counsel many times, I was asked to join the ticket with Barack Obama. I was, as I usually was, on Amtrak, going home. I commuted every day. They later told me over 1,200,000 miles on Amtrak. They should name a station or something after me. But all kidding aside, he called me after it was clear he was the de facto nominee, and he said he'd like me to join him on the ticket, at least consider it. Could he do a background check on me? You know, we have to do that background check. And I said, no, thanks, Barack. I thought he was just dragging that bloody claw through the Senate like presidential nominees do to get everybody excited and involved. And Barack told me, no, there's only one other person I'm considering. I said, Barack, I don't want to be vice president. He said, why? I said, because basically just standby equipment. I said, what I want to do, and by that time I chaired 2 major committees. I was fairly influential in the Senate, so I can help you a lot more. As a senator, I'll do everything I can. I'll campaign throughout the country for you. Barack asked me, he said, look, would you go home and talk it over with your family? Just talk it over. So I did. I called Jill from the chain on my cell phone. And when I got home, I was about halfway home when I had gotten the call. And when I got home, I went in, and the first person I called was Fritz, before the family gathered in the back porch. And I said, Fritz, what should I do? And he went into great detail. I'm serious. As a matter of fact, he sent me a long memorandum he prepared for President Carter when they were deciding how their relationship would work. He told me, in essence, that the vice presidency holds no inherent power. None. Zero. The vice presidency is merely, and it's true, a reflection of a relationship with the President of the United States. About 7 years ago, I joined Fritz at a forum in his honor at George Washington University. Fritz recounted that his greatest strength wasn't his expertise in a particular policy area. It was the genuine personal relationship he built with President Jimmy Carter. Relationship built on real affection and trust. They sat down to lunch together every week. Fritz said, make sure you get a commitment from Barack. Once a week, you have lunch to discuss whatever is on either of your minds. He was the first vice president to have an office in the West Wing, just a few steps away from the Oval Office. That never happened before. They were over in the Executive Office building, across the street. That was the true strength of the vice presidency, he said. A strength that Barack and I replicated in our time in office. And what Kamala and I are doing today, and she sends her regards to the whole family. She called me before I got in the plane. It was Fritz who lit the way. At his core, Fritz embraced everybody with the belief that everyone's entitled to be treated with dignity. Everybody. Dignity. Not just the right to vote, dignity. He was loved by the American people because he reflected the goodness of the American people, especially the people of Minnesota. You know, every senator wears on his or her sleeve the state they serve. But the love Fritz had for the people of Minnesota ran deeper than that. He loved you all, and you loved him back. It was obvious because Fritz reflected the very best qualities of this state. The warmth and optimism that you reflect. At every turn, Fritz reflected the light of this nation, who we are and what we can be. He called me when I had said in the inauguration that we're the most unique nation in all of history. We're the only nation founded on an idea. Every other nation in the world is based on geography, ethnicity, religion, race. We're founded on an idea. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, including the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And it goes on. Fritz believed that in his gut. I watched him every day for over 35 years in the Senate and when he was vice president. He united people, sharing the same light, the same hopes. Even when we disagree, he thought that was important. I'll never forget, on a personal level, what it meant to have a friend like Fritz. Less than 4 years after losing Eleanor to brain cancer, and just a year after losing Joan, Fritz was there to help me again when Jill and I lost our son, Bo, to brain cancer after a year in Iraq. I'll never forget how Fritz affected so much love and light into our family, again at our darkest moments. Nor will I forget coming here to Minneapolis 8 years ago to say goodbye to Joan. Most of you remember that Fritz went to the Mayo Clinic for a quadruple bypass the very next day. He had delayed the surgery so he could be with all of us to reflect her light. And he put off treating his own heart because, as all you know, his heart belonged to Joan. As I've said many times, say to the family, seeing your mom and dad together reminded me of that great line from Christopher Marlowe's poem, "Come live with me and be my love, and we shall all the pleasures prove." You can tell when a couple has been together a long time, so looks at each other with love, deep love. It's been said that memory is the power to gather roses in winter. Well, Ted and William, your dad blessed you with an endless garden of those memories. And most of all, the memory of two extraordinary loves. A love of more than 58 years he spent together with your mom, and a love of 51 years with your sister Eleanor. In his farewell letter, Fritz wrote that he was eager to rejoin Joan and Eleanor, two unbreakable loves. You know, Jill Biden wanted to do a garden at the Vice President's residence, the picture of which shows on the screen outside here of them standing in front of the residence, so that every family that ever had lived there, there was a garden with stones with engraving on each of the stones with the name of the couple and the children. And I called Fritz to tell him about it. He came over to the house, and it was a summer day. And he said, "Can we go in the house?" I said, "Of course." He wanted to walk up to the third floor. He walked up to the third floor and then to the end. There were bedrooms on the third floor. And he stopped in front of a door and opened it and just stared. And I knew he was thinking something deep, and I went down the hallway. And a few minutes went by, and he came down and he said, "That was Eleanor's room. I so miss her." Well, they're all together now, for all time. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "An institution is a lengthened shadow of one man." There's no doubt that the institution of the Senate and the institution of the Vice President reflect the profound legacy of Fritz Mondale. But it's not a lengthened shadow we see in those places. It's his light. And it's up to each of us now to reflect that light that Fritz was all about. To reflect Fritz's goodness and grace, the way he made people feel, no matter who you were. Just imagine what our nation could achieve if we followed Fritz's example of honor, decency, integrity. Literally just a service to the common good. There would be nothing beyond our reach. I hope we all can be Fritz's mirror. Continue to spread his light, because you know he was one of the finest men you've ever known, one of the most decent people I've ever dealt with, and one of the toughest, smartest men I've ever worked with. You were lucky to have had him. By this look of things, he was lucky to have had you. God bless you, my dear friend, among the greatest of all Americans. The highest compliment my grandfather Fingerty used to say you can give a man or a woman, he was the Irish of it, was to say, he's a good man. Fritz Mondale was a good man.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ted and William Mondale, the sons of former Vice President Walter Mondale.
Try following that. Good afternoon. My job is to thank folks that helped with us today and have been around my dad for a long time. Every one of you that is here because you had a piece or a role in his life, and I don't think anybody would like me thanking 1,200 people. But I'd like to say, Mr. President, your presence here today meant everything to our family. I know to him. You know he's watching. Jerry Ferraro's with him. They probably had Campion go out and get pizza to watch this thing. But thank you so much. It means a lot. And your last call to him right before he passed really helped him move on. He had such a smile on his face. Thank you. To the speakers, you made this absolutely, you all knew him, but you made it absolutely a service that he would have wanted. He didn't want to lay in state. He didn't want to be in Washington. He wanted to be here with you. And you reflected what he would care about and who he is, and we thank you. To our organizing committee, this is our third go at this event. But we put in countless hours of trying to plan this and do it in a way that would make sense and didn't last 5 hours, which would have been easy to do. And I want to thank the University of Minnesota for hosting us and a great staff and volunteers that worked tirelessly. Mr. President, they got the building at 2 a.m. and had it set up at 7 a.m. That's a bad volunteer job. To Dorsey and Whitney, that was my dad's home. He went to the office every day. And I once asked him, I said, what kind of law do you practice? What do you do there? He says, oh, perfume law. I said, what's that? He goes, you get the right people in the room, and when it smells right, you leave. So he did that for 20 to 30 years and perfected the art. Tina mentioned it, but Linda Pedersen was at his side all the way through and through today. We asked Linda, putting this event together, said, Linda, how are you getting the emails out? Are you using MailChimp? Are you using some kind of service? She goes, no, I'm sending each one individually. We're like, oh my goodness, you've sent like 7,000 emails in the last 2 weeks. But thank you. I want to also say one of the things that touched him late in life was the naming, the visionaries that named the St. Croix River Valley after him. It reflected his accomplishments, but his importance of nature, and of course his first date with my mom. So thank you for that. To his staff, you all have come from all over the country and indeed the world to be here with us today, whether it was from the Attorney General's office, the Senate, the White House, the embassy in Japan. He was so proud of the work he did and so proud of the accomplishments that you all achieved together. I just want his oldest staff member we want to single out, Mike Berman, who started with him in 1963. And Mike was on every organizing call. And so we thank Mike for his hard work. There was a story the other day about a former president who they didn't have records of foreign trips, of the gifts. Well, when you go on these foreign trips, they give you a lot of nice gifts. And everyone on the Mondale plane knew that when they landed, Mike Berman would be calling them up, and they could keep nothing, or he would visit them in their office. So thank you, Mike. And I want to thank the campaign staff. I've got my hog pin on here. You guys worked so hard for him. It was so great to see you all last night and this morning. And yes, Mr. President, we had eggs and bacon for breakfast. Earlier, John Meacham reflected on that day in 1948 when it all started for my dad. And we know it wasn't until April 19th, 2021 was when he was forced to stop. And so William and I, we believe to honor our father by doing so is to never stop remembering his legacy of profoundly changing America for the better, and to never stop doing our part every day to preserve and strengthen our democracy and perfect our union. Thank you. Why don't you stand over here, folks? Give me a hug. Dad always took everything that life could throw at him to make the future better for everyone. He only really wanted to look back so we could improve on our common future. As kids, sometimes we were able to get him talking about growing up in what everyone except him would call poverty in southern Minnesota, in Ceylon and in Elmore. No shoes, hitchhiking to college every day, and having one sweater and one pair of pants for all of law school. Dad always considered the devastation of the Great Depression best remembered as a springboard for communal action that brought us the America we all love, the one that our president and our elected leaders and all of us here are fighting to protect and to expand. Mom and Dad adored that spirit of the New Deal, of progressive action for the betterment of everyone, in their home as well as at work. And we would listen to music together. And one song that just got under Dad's skin was from this beautiful musical called Annie. The movie came out in 1982, and they just loved that musical. And Dad would sing from that musical with his beautiful, underused baritone voice, and it just never left him. He just loved that song. So why Annie? Well, if we know Annie, the story of the orphan, it's the tale of how one person who was born without anything could stay true to her hope and to her optimism to find justice for everyone, everyone in the orphanage and everyone everywhere. And so that makes sense to me, why he really loved that song. We've heard about his life, and, you know, it's hard to remember the loss of our family members. It really is. And that really slowed Dad down. But on his 92nd birthday, and he wasn't really going out much because he was tired. He was tired. But on that day of his 92nd birthday, my dear child, Charlie Mondale, who is here today, he got their best friend to come to sing for Dad on his birthday. And this person, who was Charlie's first and best friend, had become quite a singer and was singing the role of Annie at the Ordway. So we asked Lillian Hockman to come and sing, and what a song, what a joy to hear. Dad was so happy. He was just ready to fly out of the place. Today, as we ready ourselves to move past this beautiful service missing those who have gone on before, missing those who could not be here today, President Carter, Secretary Albright, so many others that Ted did such a great job of summarizing and remembering. Today, as we are ready to move on to our lives of service and action, let's think for just one more moment about what Dad would want us to focus on as we leave here, to better our lives and to hone our spirits for community and for joy. So to sing one last song as we move out, I would like Lillian Hockman to come and sing the song Tomorrow from the musical Annie. Let's all welcome her.
Your bottom dollar that tomorrow there'll be sun. Just thinking about tomorrow clears away the cobwebs and the sorrow till there's none. When I'm stuck with a day that's gray and lonely, I just stick up my chin and grin and say, oh, the sun'll come out tomorrow, so you gotta hang on till tomorrow. Come what may, tomorrow, tomorrow, I love ya tomorrow, you're always a day away. The sun'll come out tomorrow, so you gotta hang on till tomorrow. Come what may, tomorrow, tomorrow, I love ya tomorrow, you're always a day away. Tomorrow, tomorrow, I love ya tomorrow, you're always a day
Welcome back to the stage, Governor Tim Walz.
Thank you. I would ask you, if you're able, to please rise and join the Pride of Minnesota, the University of Minnesota Marching Band, for one more Minnesota rouser for our friend Fritz.